Hello, this is Chris from Turn 1 Thoughtseize, and this is a cool deck that Aaron and I have both been playing our own kind of versions of, Eldrazi Taxes, an odd hybrid between Death and Taxes slash mono white hate bears and the white black Eldrazi lists that got popular before just aggro Eldrazi took over. Uh, so we have, as it says, a lot of our original Death and Taxes pieces, 4 Leonin Arbiters and 4 Thalias, and Leonin Arbiter, so many mana bases in Modern are just fetch land, shock land mana bases. Leonin Arbiter just really shuts all of that down by not letting people search their libraries, and we don't run any fetch lands or anything that makes us search, so it's just a one-sided tax effect that really hurts our opponents. And alongside Thalia, which makes all non-creature spells cost 1 more, we're really putting a tax on their mana, which is really the taxing part of the deck. And so all of these decks that are just trying to get 3 colors together and play all these 1 and 2 cost spells just can't do that anymore and have to play by our rules. And it all comes on just 2 powered, 2 drop creatures. And it just kind of gets there, which is just kind of how Death and Taxes normally works. You play enough hateful effects and change the rules of the game enough, and eventually you'll win with 2 powered creatures. Additionally, you have Flicker Wisp, which in Mono White Death and Taxes you get a little bit of extra value from by when it comes in you get to exile a permanent until end of turn with things like Blade Splicer or Kitchen Finks, and you just get to abuse the blink effects. Here we do that a little bit, and it's also fantastic with Vile because we have an instant speed way to put Flicker Wisp and other creatures into play and blink something and get it back later. And it is a 3 powered flyer, which is once again just a beater, so that once we change the rules to our liking, we just get to attack them, and Flicker Wisp really helps get that done quicker. Here we have 4 Tidehowler Sculler, which is kind of like the creature that bridges the gap between mono white Death and Taxes, mono white hate bears, and some white black hate bears, which has shown up a bit, Death and Taxes, as well as this white black Eldrazi deck. So Tidehowler Sculler, 2/2 for 2, white and a black, enters a battlefield, opponent reveals their hand, you choose a card from it, it's exiled until Tidehowler Sculler leaves the battlefield. So this is really useful because of processing, which Wasteland Strangler right here. We can take a card an opponent owns from exile, put it into their graveyard, and in Wasteland Strangler's case, it gives a target creature -3/-3 until end of turn. So there are a lot of times we'll be able to go turn 2 Tidehowler Sculler, take their best card, turn 3 Wasteland Strangler, put their card from exile into the graveyard so it's permanently gone, and then use Wasteland Strangler to kill something. And then maybe if we're just really great, we can untap, play Flicker Wisp, flicker Tidehowler Sculler, take another card from their hand, rinse and repeat. If we don't have Flicker Wisp, we can always use Eldrazi Displacer, another 3 mana, 3 powered Eldrazi in the deck. It allows us to pay 2 and a colorless, has to be colorless, to exile a target creature, and then return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So we can blink our creatures, our opponent's creatures, whatever's going to help us get there. And so Displacer allows us to abuse Flicker Wisp even more. It allows us to save our creatures in response to a removal spell, and it allows us to abuse Tidehowler Sculler by taking more cards, Wasteland Strangler by killing more creatures, and Thought-Knot Seer by taking more cards, which is one of our last Eldrazi. So 4/4 for 4, fine, needs a colorless mana, and when it comes into play, we take a card from our opponent's hand, non-land. When it leaves the battlefield, they get to draw a card. So this also, it just adds a little bit more disruption, and it interacts favorably with Eldrazi Displacer or Flicker Wisp, because let's say after we're done attacking, we can use Displacer's ability or Flicker Wisp to bounce Thought-Knot Seer. Our opponent's going to draw a card, but then Thought-Knot Seer is going to come back into play, and we're going to be able to take that card, especially if we're using Flicker Wisp. So we can really abuse it and just make sure we take their best card. Once again, we have Aether Vial to allow creatures to go into play at instant speed, We can sometimes tick Vial up to 4. We get to put a counter on it every upkeep and put in creatures with that converted mana cost. Sometimes we actually do hit 4 on Aether Vial. We can Vial into Thought-Knot Seer on our opponent's draw step and just take their best card from that turn, and now they have a 4/4 that they need to attack through, so that's pretty great. Our last creature, 1 Reality Smasher. It's pretty good. Cost 5, it's only a 1 of. It doesn't really fit the rest of the theme, except it's an Eldrazi, sometimes we get a discount, and it really does hit just very hard. It has Trample, Haste. Trample's really big because things like Lingering Souls tokens, 1/1 tokens, can really gum up our deck a lot because we're playing Thalia's a 2/1, Flicker Wisp is a 2/1, Leonin Arbiter's a 2/2, Tidal Skull's a 2/2. We're playing a lot of small, dinky creatures. Reality Smasher just allows us for that not to be an issue. So we have that going for us, and you might have noticed there's quite a bit of a theme here. We're really just disrupting our opponent. It's borderline locking our opponent out of the game. Between our taxing effects through the original Death and Taxes creatures and disruption like Tidehowler Sculler, kind of the bridge gap. Wasteland Strangler is a kill spell on a creature, Thought-Knot Seer, more disruption, and then we also get to run some of the most efficient disruption spells in Modern, 2 Thoughtseizes and 4 Path to Exiles. So even with Thalia in play, all of our disruption is just like 1 mana or creature based, and we're just stopping our opponent from doing what they want to do and just slowly whittling down their life total with 2 powered creatures. And it gets there. Some things I should definitely mention. Aether Vial, I really liked. I think Aether Vial belongs in this style deck. It really just keeps the engine going. It allows you to have turns where it's like, all right, I'm going to play Wasteland Strangler and Vial and Tidehowler Sculler on my opponent's draw step, whereas before you'd only be able to play the 1 creature. In a way, Aether Vial almost generates mana, so to speak. And lastly, speaking of mana, our mana base, 22 lands. Because we have Eldrazi and require colorless mana, we need to run a lot of colorless sources. We're running 4 Ghost Quarters for 2 reasons. 1, colorless mana, and 2, with Leonin Arbiter, it's just strip mine. We get to sacrifice it. Normally, Ghost Quarter allows our opponent to search up a basic, but if they can't pay 2 mana to search their library, like Leonin Arbiter says, they just lose their land and that's it. Additionally, we have 4 Eldrazi Temple, which provides colorless mana, and 2 mana for Eldrazi creatures. So this is just a ramp spell in a land, hard to interact with. No one's really running a lot of land hate right now. It's only a 4 of because that's all we've got, but we're happy, and that's why this deck, it uses Eldrazi a lot, but it doesn't need the Eldrazi to win the game. We have 4 Caves of Koilos, which both give us colored mana and colorless mana. It's almost like a tri-land in our deck. Lastly, 2 Shambling Vents, 2 Godless Shrines, which I thought was fine. The only thing I would say is I'm running 6 basic lands here. If anything, I would probably cut a swamp. So I record these deck techs after I do the matches. Definitely want as few swamps as possible. I've seen lists running as many as 3 swamps. I just think that's completely incorrect. Cut as many. I want 1 basic swamp and that's it. So now that these videos are done, I'm probably going to be changing 1 swamp for Godless Shrine and 1 plains for the 4th Godless Shrine. Have 4 Godless Shrines, 2 Shambling Vents, the 4 Caves of Koilos, Eldrazi Temple, and Ghost Quarters. And I think that's the mana base where you really want to be at. Other than that, the deck ran incredibly smoothly mana-wise. It's really consistent 2.5 color deck. Now onto the sideboard. So first glaring thing is these Reality Smashers. Sometimes we just need to smash more face. There are matchups where certain cards like Aether Vial aren't good. Just certain cards in our deck aren't doing anything. We can bring in Reality Smashers to replace certain creatures or disruptive spells that don't do anything. Inquisition of Kozilek is for combo decks. We do run a lot of hand disruption, but sometimes we need it turn 1. So this just allows us to do that and then use our Tidehowler Scullers and our Thought-Knot Seers later in the game to make sure they're not going to go off. I'm running 2 Eidolon of Rhetorics. After playing games, I want an Eidolon of Rhetoric, but I'm going to cut it down to 1. If you have a lot of Storm and Affinity, Eidolon of Rhetoric isn't awful. Normally it's a little too slow for Affinity, but against things like actual Storm, It's very good. I had run into a lot of Storm for whatever reason. It was after not playing it since putting Eidolon of Rhetoric in my deck. Uh, it was just some freak. I just kept getting matched up against Storm. And as soon as I put Eidolon of Rhetoric in my sideboard, I stopped getting matched up against Storm. Even Mind Sensor, really good against Scapeshift. There are a lot of decks that really need their 3-color mana bases, and sometimes certain other cards in your deck aren't that great against them, so even Mind Sensor can come in against those. It's also a flyer. Sometimes you run into odd decks that are weak to flyers. 2-core Firewalker for burn, and Zoo. 2 Stony Silence for affinity, and 2 Rest in Peace for graveyard decks and Offensive Company, that sort of thing. So a lot of hateful pieces. Change to the sideboard. I would definitely cut one Eidolon of Rhetoric. For a disenchant, the second Eidolon of Rhetoric, if you just don't fear Storm at all, should be a Ghostly Prison to fight against small aggro decks. But other than that, it's a really great list to start with. Definitely had a lot of fun playing it myself. And just real quick before I get into the games, business side of things, if you enjoy this, please like and comment. If you don't, please let us know and what we can do to improve stuff. That's super helpful. Also, if you don't listen to the Turn 1 Thoughtseize podcast, then you don't know this already. We are currently taking pre-orders for our Playmats for the podcast, but the revenue does also just get kind of shared and will help put things towards Magic Online as well. If you would like to do that, there is a link in the description. In addition to that, we have a link to our new designed website where all of our content just gets put all in one convenient place. So if you have some time, please check that out right in the description. And without further ado, here are the matches.